Welcome, everybody, to the Wednesday edition of the Freedom Link right here on the Orion Talk Radio Network. I'm Joe Joseph, along with Tim Watts and John King. Boys, how we doing this evening?
Hey, Joey.
Hi, guys.
Oh, look at you. You found the mute button. Very good, John. Well, tonight our special guest is Larken Rose of LarkenRose.com. Of course, you may know him from YouTube, and if you've gotten any of his books, he's a great author as well. We're going to be talking tonight about... well, what's going on in the country, the environment, the climate, and what his thoughts are on the whole thing and what could be causing it. So, Larken, welcome to the broadcast.
Hey, thanks for having me.
That's fantastic to have you aboard. I'm a big fan of all your, especially the YouTube videos, my favorite, of course, and, you know, all the listeners out there, you guys know, I'm always pushing the tiny dot, because, I mean, I'm a picture guy, you know, so I like the books with the big pictures in it. So that's good, you know. It allows me
most of the country, yeah.
That's right. When I'm not selling propane and propane accessories, I'm watching Larken Rose's Tiny Dot.
Thank you, Hank.
Hey, no problem. But anyway, it's great to have you aboard, and of course you know what's going on in the country right now, and as you're well aware, I mean, it looks as though they're going for the gun grab. What's your take on the atmosphere in this country, and how do you think we got this far? How do you think we got to this place?
Well, I actually, oddly enough, with all the horrible things going on, I think this is a very good sign. And I think this is just the latest in a series of demonstrations that the people in power, not that they're strong and scary, but that they're weak and they're scared. Because when I see them trying to do this mad dash towards, you know, disarming everybody, which obviously they're trying to do that now, and I think they realize they won't ever have a better chance than right now. What they don't seem to realize is they don't have a chance right now either. But when governments jump towards totalitarian like this, it's almost always an indication that they know they're losing the battle of ideas. You know, the philosophy, the people's minds, when they start losing that, they always, even though it never works, the tyrants always try to jump towards just brute force control. The trouble is, when your slaves are figuring out that they shouldn't be slaves anymore and you try to whip them harder, they don't respond well. Or they do respond well, but not nicely.
Right.
And so I see this as a huge sign of desperation on the part of the control freaks. And they're not going to pull this off. There's no way that 100 million Americans are going to say, well, golly, some psycho supposedly shot some kids, so you can have my gun. It's not going to happen. And the fact that they're even trying to push this like, oh, okay, look, this is really bad. Now we get to come and take all your guns, right? It shows huge desperation. And the bad news is when tyrants get desperate, really unpleasant things tend to happen. The good news is ultimately it ends and the empire falls over. Every time. Tyrants always, they start losing control, they try to grab for everything, and the whole game falls over for them. The scary part is in the meantime, they tend to hurt or kill a lot of people. And so my short-term goal is hopefully we can minimize the amount of destruction that the control freaks manage to inflict on society while their empire falls on its face. But in the long run, I think this is a very good sign.
Timmy, I find Larken to be a glass is half full kind of guy, kind of like me. It's not the glass is half empty.
Yeah. No, but all very good points. And it's obvious, Larken, that they don't have the power yet. I mean, they've got an awful lot of power. We all know that. But they don't have total impunity yet. And this is their last grab. I mean, they're trying really hard.
Yeah, and it's not working. I mean, I rarely even talk about what I actually think happened in 9/11 and in Aurora. The Aurora shooting instantly stank to me of MK Ultra, but I didn't even talk about that very much because a lot of people just don't seem capable of thinking about it. But let's just pretend that some psycho evil people did these. Even pretending the official story is true, you instantly see the government try to use it as an excuse to grab more power, and it's just not working anymore. I mean, even 9/11, where several thousand Americans died, for a while everybody freaked out and said, we have to do something. But then a few years later, people looked around and said, well, this Patriot Act is garbage. This police state stuff is garbage. This warmongering is garbage. So it doesn't work anymore long term. You can sort of scare and shock people temporarily, but the propaganda just isn't working the way it always has for the tyrants. I mean, half a century ago, you could, false flag some building and the whole country would be rah, 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 let's go invade wherever did this or wherever you say did this. And now people are suspicious and they're curious and they're hesitant to, let's go nuke some country over there. They don't fall for it anymore. Some people do. Obviously, some people still, are cheering for let's take away everybody's guns. But it just doesn't work universally the way it used to. A lot of people are skeptical. And the fact that, you do polls of the public and a lot of people say, yeah, we think they're lying about this and they're lying about that and we don't nearly trust them to do this and we think, they tried to use it to do have TSA treat everybody like criminals, and a bunch of people are getting annoyed by that. For a while, people put up with it, and then people got more and more annoyed, and it's in the media. And so it's just nobody is seeing the federal government as the good guy. Basically, the two categories are they're either incompetent or they're evil, but nobody's cheering them on like, yay, they're our great saviors. It's either they're bumbling idiots or they're diabolical villains.
Hey, now wait a minute. What about the ladies that got their Obama phone? Don't you think that she thinks that they're doing a good job?
Yeah, I don't. Thankfully, I don't think she represents the general public. Of course, there will always be people who don't dare to think for themselves and are terrified of thinking for themselves. So they want some big savior to come along, and there will always be a number of people who do that. But just in terms of percentage, there are a lot of people who just don't fall for it anymore. Even if they accept the mainstream media version of events, they still say, well, that's a reason for me to go get a gun. It's not a reason to disarm me.
Absolutely.
And, gun sales are through the roof again, which shows a lot of people realize the problem isn't that they have guns. It's that somebody else bad has a gun. Yeah. And if you want to balance it and you're a good guy, maybe you should go get a gun. And so obviously that's not the reaction that the control freaks want. The control freaks want to say, this is why nobody except government agents should have guns. Because, golly, we're so trustworthy and honest. We get them, but you shouldn't have them. It's just not working. The propaganda just isn't working. And when tyrants lose that, they lose everything. And in the meantime, they might make horrible things happen, but they will lose everything in this case.
Here's something, to think about, guys, that, maybe the fact that they've taken some baby steps with this, that they've had to work progressively to get to their goal. I mean, that's actually hurt them because it's woke a lot of people up, in the process. And thank goodness for the Internet, because the Internet is the great facilitator of all of this, and obviously why they want to get rid of the Internet for us, or at least clamp down on it. But another indicator I look to is to who we're still fighting in this country, and that's the Nielsen ratings. When you look at the Nielsen ratings, 2/3 of America is unplugged from the tube right now. I won't say altogether like me. I mean, I just don't watch it. But it's heartening to see that there's really only like 110 million households that are plugged into that right now. So that's the core that we battle, the core that are unenlightened, the ones that are thinking, oh, yeah, we got to get rid of guns because the media says so. But the nice thing is there are a lot of people out there that aren't going along with it. Nielsen corroborates that. And you know what else corroborates it? This great gun buy, not the gun grab, but the gun buy. That's your litmus test in America right now.
Tyrants are certainly good salesmen for the gun industry and the gun lobby. That's for sure. They certainly know how to sell some guns in this country, and in a way, sometimes I wonder. In my skeptical mind, I always say to myself, did the gun industry put him up to this? I mean, really? I mean, did he really? I mean, because it happens every time in this country. Anytime they talk of a gun grab, anytime they talk of an assault weapons ban, anytime they talk of police state, there's an instant run on ammo and guns. Every time, like without fail. And,
but the control freaks have an actual reason to want us disarmed. Otherwise, they'd say, yeah, it was probably scam.
Right.
But I got to wonder if like Chucky Schumer buys, stock in Colt or something before one of these things happens and just doesn't tell anybody about it. But yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah, absolutely. So now here's my question to you, and it's more of a philosophical question. Now, we've seen this time after time go on throughout human history where governments go and they become tyrannical and they oppress and they kill through genocide, all for greed and power and everything like that. Because now, if government keeps doing that time after time after time after time, talk to me about a solution. If government isn't the answer, what is the answer, Larken?
Well, my solution's pretty wacky, so you might have to brace yourself.
No, it's okay. I'm bracing myself. Go ahead.
It's pretty extreme.
You might find you're in company in good company. So go ahead.
Good. The problem actually, like our problem right now, is not the people in Washington, D.C. Yeah, they're evil, power-happy, murderous psychos. It's not that they're good by any stretch of the imagination, but all of the power they have is because 300 million other people imagine an obligation to obey them. When a few hundred crooks in Washington say, you have to give us a cut of every paycheck you get, 100 million people say, oh, gosh, well, if that's the law, I guess I'll pay my fair share. And when a few hundred crooks in D.C. say, you're not allowed to have this weapon and you're not allowed to have that weapon and you have to do this and you need a license to do that and we're going to regulate this and outlaw this, and if you grow the wrong plant, we're going to kick your door down and put you in a cage. The problem isn't that there are a few psychos over there saying that. It's that there are several 100 million people who think that because they said that, it means something, that we have an obligation to bow to these boneheads. And that's what, the video of the tiny dot is just a very, simple little cartoon thing to demonstrate the weirdness of having this huge throng of people that imagines this obligation to bow to this little bunch of crooks. And unfortunately, most of history has consisted of tons and tons of people bowing to a little set of crooks. And this isn't just this country. This is the whole history of the whole world. Whole bunch of people bow to a little set of crooks. Little set of crooks gets more and more nasty and power happy and robs people more and oppresses people and occasionally murders a few million and does nasty things. And it gets to the point where it's really, really, really bad. The trouble is the throng of people, all they've ever known is bowing to a little group of control freaks. And so whether they have a revolution or there's an economic collapse or whatever happens to the current set of control freaks, all they can think of is, now who should be the control freaks bossing us all around? So the cycle that goes over and over and over again is they knock one king off the throne, or he falls off on his own, or they get invaded from another country, whatever. One king falls off the throne, and immediately the question in everybody's heads is, who should be on the throne now? And what needs to happen, the only thing that's going to stop this cycle, is when people start asking a different question, which is, why is there a throne? There shouldn't be a throne. If there wasn't a throne, we wouldn't get a psycho on it every stinking time. And he wouldn't rob us, and he wouldn't do warmongering, and he wouldn't do all this evil stuff if we stopped imagining that the guy on the throne had the right to rule us and stopped imagining we had the obligation to obey. So what has to fix isn't anything having to do with Washington, D.C. It has to do with what's between the ears of 300 million people who feel an obligation to obey the bunch of narcissistic sociopaths infesting Washington, D.C. Imagine if tomorrow we all just ignored them and didn't pay any attention to them. They literally wouldn't have any power. They wouldn't even have any enforcers. Well, if all the people just said, yeah, just psychos, we're just going to ignore you from now on. That's the end.
To that point, Larken, I would maybe disagree and say that, they've already taken their power. I think if we leave them alone, I don't think they'll stop. I think they'll just continue. However, you made a good point before about the fact that, that they have this throne and who gives it to them. And, we've been telling everybody, God damn it, you better be calling your congressman right now. And we've tried to make it easy by putting a banner on the front page that has the phone number to Capitol Hill. And if you click on that banner, it'll also let you write to your congressman or your senator. I've actually done that this week. I called both. I've written to both, and I've given them an earful. And if more people did that every single day, I think those people that sit up there and think they've got it thrown and go, oh, my gosh, the populace is a little bit unruly right now. You know, I think that is a time we got to make our voice heard, very much so.
Here's where I do disagree in tactics and in philosophy. I think as long as the tyrants are hearing us go to them and saying, don't do this or do that or repeal this or pass this law, they know that we're just begging them to legislate what we want. They
almost like a recognition of power, right, Larken?
Exactly. We are asking them for permission to be free. What if instead, I'll give two quick examples. What if from now on 300 million people just didn't file tax returns? They didn't call their congressman. They didn't protest. They didn't say anything. They didn't argue anything. They just said, yeah, I'm not giving you my money anymore and I'm not filling out these returns. Good luck finding 300 million jail cells and good luck finding all the people to prosecute us. That's example one. Example two is suppose Obama, Congress loses its mind and says, nobody can have a gun out there. You all have to turn them in tomorrow. And 100 million gun owners don't show up the next day. That's the end. They literally wouldn't even try to go get them because they'd realize, wow, 100 million people out there know that we just legally commanded them to turn them in and none of them did. Oops, I give up. Literally, it's the fact that we imagine that we need their legislative permission, the fact that we care what their so-called laws say. And so many people spend so much time and effort begging them to change their laws to not be so tyrannical and ridiculous, instead of just saying, you can legislate anything you want. You can scribble to your heart's content. We don't care. We're going to ignore it. And
that's right.
They do not have the resources to collect or command or control if the people don't imagine an obligation to obey. We don't need a revolution. We don't need an election. Literally, if the people understood freedom, we would ignore Washington out of existence.
What's funny is I say it all the time. If you participate, you are complicit. It's really that simple. At the end of the day, if you participate in the system, you are complicit in the crime. Just like these endless wars. Where do they get the money from?
Yeah.
So it's like you say, stop paying, game over. Question is, how do you get people to see it that way?
En masse. En masse is the key. That is the whole key here, to get 300 million people to act en masse. That is
and you don't even have to get 300 million. That's the thing is even if you get for example, look at 535 people, vocal majority, right? Or vocal minority, very, very small minority, yet wield an incredible amount of power, and it's all perception, But the interesting thing is that should you be able to get, let's just say 100 million gun owners, game over, done,
Yeah.
That's really it, isn't it?
Absolutely. And that's why I focus entirely on trying to get people to understand what freedom really is, what self-ownership really is, and how everything we're taught about government is mythology. It doesn't make sense. People should organize. That's a good idea. People should cooperate. That's a good idea. Making a ruling class, bad idea. And it always results in oppression, and it always results in the people seeing the government as the problem that they have to do something to, instead of just ignoring it. Yeah, to me, playing the game legitimizes the game. I use the example of if two guys show up at your front door and they say, one of us is going to punch you in the face, you get to decide which one. What do you do? Choose one, or do you slam the door in their face? If you choose one, you're agreeing. You're playing their game. You're saying, well, okay, I want the slightly weaker looking guy to punch me in the face. No, you don't say that. You say neither of you have the right to punch me in the face. Go away, or you'll meet my Mossberg 12 gauge. And every election is two crooks saying either I'm going to rule you and control your life and steal your money, or he's going to rule you and control your life and steal your money. Please pick one. And the fact that people do legitimizes the entire game. It legitimizes the extortion.
And it's a good point. It's a good point, and I think, to that, we totally miss our opportunity in this country, and that is during the election process. We don't vet these people hard enough. We raise the flag and wave for our party. Oh, boy, my guy's going to win. My guy's going to win. And we've got that Super Bowl mentality in this country. Until we get people out of that left-right paradigm and start looking at other alternatives and maybe holding these people to the fire while they're trying to seek office and then hold their feet to the fire. I just think we miss an opportunity at that point because, again, who would have ever talked about a gun ban while they were running for election? Not one of them would have had the guts to stand up and say that.
Well, of course not. But to recognize our election process these days is valid too is also a big misconception because
I understand that.
Yeah, because it's not. But you don't get the message out, Tim, and I think you're right. You don't get the message out unless you're out there doing things that you're participating in educating the masses. It's like Thomas Jefferson said, educate the people generally, and tyranny and oppression will vanish like the dark at the dawn of the day. So it's up to us to inform the people and get them to understand. People aren't stupid, but they're sadly misinformed and uninformed. Folks, we'll be right back after these messages. Don't go away. Much more to come with Larken Rose when the Freedom Link returns. Welcome back, folks. With all the talk of a gun ban and the usurpation of our Second Amendment rights, Orion Talk Radio urges everyone to start calling your elected representatives. Call the Capitol Hill switchboard at 202-224-3121 and ask for your congressional representative and let them know that we're not going to take this. Please call or email your congressperson today. Don't ask for permission. Get out now and start mobilizing protests. Don't wait like the British did. Make your voice heard now. Speak up for your Second Amendment right, because at Orion Talk Radio, we're fighting hard to keep it. Joe Joseph here, along with Tim Watson. John King. Our special guest is Larken Rose of LarkenRose.com, accomplished author and activist, and we'll get right back to him. But right now, it's time to call the King's Court into session. So, John King, take it away.
Hello, Rodney. Who is Rodney? 1 in a million. Speaking the truth to people every day, it's rewarding when you run into someone who is able to see through all the crap. Rodney, it was a pleasure talking to you. So, you all thought you were safe. The fiscal cliff averted. You're wrong again. Well, sort of. Think of the cartoon The Roadrunner and Coyote. Remember the coyote would run off the cliff, but he wouldn't fall until he realized he was standing in midair? Sometimes he could inch his way back to the cliff and get within a step before he would fall. Well, that's where we are right now. We have inched back to the cliff, but we're not on safe ground yet. It seems that this is a half-truth that would make any politician proud. They just kicked the can down the road to February. Yes, they signed a deal. However, defense spending was kicked to February. This will not be talked about in the mainstream press, most more than likely. February is significant because the debt ceiling will need adjusted as it will be reached. So it will need to be addressed in February. So Obama and company is going to hold the country hostage and raise the debt ceiling. The money spent will no doubt be used against the American people. If 30,000 drones above us in our skies doesn't say police state, I don't know what does. Hundreds of millions of rounds of hollow point ammunition were purchased for domestic use. What more do they need? These globalists are planning for a gun grab, and they are planning on holding our country hostage to do it. I wouldn't be a bit surprised if there were a false flag coming down the line. So, for those of you that think that semi-auto weapons are not needed, as the Second Amendment was written when they shot muskets, let's ask our country's father what he thinks. George Washington, sir, what are your thoughts on letting the modern-day American have firearms that are equal to the state? A free people ought not to be armed and disciplined. A free people ought not only be armed and disciplined, but they should have significant arms and ammunition to maintain a status of independence from any who may attempt to abuse them, which would include their own government. George Washington. So there you have it. Give up your guns, you become a slave. The American people are already a slave to the government. Look up the term usury. That's usury. Also look up the movie Slavery by Consent and learn this is all facade. The ride is over and they know it. The proverbial poop is about to hit the fan. So they want your guns for fear of a French-style revolution. Also watch the movie The Tiny Dot. Learn that the people are the boss of the government. If you give up your guns to the criminal government, you commit your children's children to being a slave to the elite. Do you know what you call a well-armed slave? I do. It's called a free man. Court adjourned.
Thank you, John King. Thank you, John King. And boy, I'll tell you, it's great to have you here, Larken, again. And thank you for coming on the broadcast. I, thinking about this fiscal cliff, like John brought up, isn't it interesting? Again, here's the programming. Here is shoveling, almost making a decision for you in your brain by coming up with these terminologies. Like, for example, with Sandy, all of a sudden it became Superstorm Sandy. I mean, we've never had a superstorm before. And instead of Hurricane Sandy, it's now Superstorm Sandy. And these changes in terminology change the way people think, don't they?
Yeah, and the fact that people get bombarded with an idea from all sides, from an organized mainstream media that says, here's what you should think about. Here are the terms, here are the ideas, here's the conclusion you should reach. And gosh, it must be the most important thing in your life because every time you turn on the stinking radio, you're hearing about it. So it's what they think, it's what they should conclude about it. It's the terms they use. And it works because then everybody talks about the terms they're taught to talk about. And I often wonder if there are any limits to it. Like if tomorrow they said there's a rabid squirrel epidemic, if the media focused on that for 3 days, probably half the country would be talking about the rabid squirrel epidemic as if it matters. Because people imagine that what comes out of their TV or comes out of the radio is what matters, and it almost never is. But people having to think for themselves is too much effort. To have to figure out the world on your own, it's much easier to just sit down and let somebody else feed you what you need to know. It's totally lazy, and the guy feeding you information is always going to feed you whatever serves him, not what serves you, not even what's true, not what's helpful, but whatever happens to serve his agenda. But people do that. Yeah, well, people do that intellectual cop-out where they don't want to think for themselves, and so it's pathetic. The media can make anything they want into the discussion of the whole country, and lots of people will talk about it as if it matters, and it doesn't.
Well, we know the mainstream media is complicit, obviously, and they push a talking point and agenda. But let me ask you, what would be a viable solution to not only educating people to the deceptive nature of the mainstream media, but also of holding them accountable for the lies and the deception? What would be some solutions that you can come up with to solve that issue?
Well, it really just has to do with whether people want to put in the effort to think for themselves. And if you can demonstrate to them that not just they're being lazy, but they're actually believing things and doing things that are detrimental to themselves and their family and society and the country and the world because they're just sitting there believing stuff, if you can make it matter to them what's true and what isn't, then more people might pay attention. And the fact that, you can point to most of these stories, take the Sandy Hook thing and the gun grab. Like, the discussion became, should government take everyone's guns? Like, that is not what would have occurred to any rational person if they saw the story and, never mind whether the story is accurate. But, Joe Schmo who hears on the radio that, some psycho shot a bunch of kids at a school, his first thought is not, gee, maybe I should go next door and steal my neighbor's gun so he doesn't have one. This is a perfect example of an idea put in people's heads by the control freak elite that wouldn't have occurred to anybody. Nobody would have thought of that. Just like nobody knew who Obama was before the puppet masters decided to run him out there and say, gosh, he should be president. People don't even understand that the debates they have come from whatever the media tells them to think about and talk about. And if they can be shown that doing that is designed to be detrimental to them, to the general public, that playing that game and going along with it doesn't help us. It doesn't keep us informed. It doesn't keep us free. It keeps us enslaved and gets us robbed and keeps us in fear, which is one of the major purposes of the media, is to scare the heck out of people constantly so they run to government and say, do something about this. But if people realize that thinking for yourself really is to your own benefit, then they might actually do it. But it feels so comfortable and easy to just let somebody else tell you what you ought to think. The trouble is the results are not pretty. They haven't even been pretty in this country. They weren't pretty in Soviet Russia. They weren't pretty under the Third Reich. They weren't pretty in Red China. It's right. Never pretty when you let the elites tell you what to believe or even what to think about. They'll pretend to give you two choices. You can believe A or you can believe B, but you have to think about this topic and you have to choose one of those choices. The result of that is never pleasant. And I think that the fact that mainstream media has less and less viewers and the alternative media and the internet has been growing by leaps and bounds is an indication that a bunch of people are figuring out, hey, they are not feeding information to me for my benefit. They are feeding the information they want to feed to me for their benefit. And maybe I ought to look for other information to find out what's actually happening.
Novel concept, don't you think? John King, your thoughts?
Yeah, I seem to be constantly running into people that just regurgitate what they hear off the Communist News Network or something like that. They're incapable of thinking for themselves. They're incapable of researching anything to find out the actual real truth. They just only know what they're being told, and that in itself is a form of slavery.
Are they incapable of doing it, Larken, or are people just creatures of habit that like to, the one thing that I find is as creatures of habit, we don't like change too much, especially change for the worse, and so people like their little comfort zones and they like to stay there. And isn't it convenient when Fox News or CNN or MSNBC or any other of these mainstream outlets can feed you all the information that you need conveniently in a one-stop shop?
Right, and that way we can be lazy. We don't have to think for ourselves, and things will feel familiar. Well, because the most disturbing thing, and it's something I went through, and I make as many people as I can go through it, the most disturbing thing is to have your paradigms fall out from underneath you and to suddenly be left in a position where you feel like you have to figure out the world all over again from scratch. And so nobody wants that because it's unfamiliar and it's uncomfortable and it's scary and you don't know what you're going to find. But it's totally necessary for society to ever move forward, to ever be anything like, to ever have freedom or justice or anything of the sort, for people to be able to back up, throw away their assumptions, throw away their paradigms, and think about things. And never in a zillion years are you going to get that from the establishment mainstream media. The experts, they don't do that. They don't ever do that. And even if they were being honest and didn't have slimy agendas to try to dupe people, still, you don't get any progress from blindly parroting what somebody else tells you. The only way society moves forward is when people back up and start to think about things for themselves. And the first thing you realize is, wow, almost everything I hear is a total lie, especially everything I hear on the TV and the radio. And a lot of it's not even hard to show that it's a lie. It's just a blatant, obvious lie once you start to look outside the box. But if you never do, you'll believe absolutely anything. I mean, I often say that the difference between Pravda and the U.S. media is over there, they were smart enough to know that Pravda was propaganda. Over here, Americans still think they're getting the news. They still think they're getting actual facts. So we eventually will catch up to the Russians in figuring out it's all orchestrated, controlled propaganda. And then people can look outside the box and say, okay, well, what actually is true? And instead of letting somebody else decide the topics you'll think about and the conclusions you'll reach and the actions you'll take and the choices you'll make, maybe you're in charge of your own life and you should figure out that stuff for yourself. It is tough, but it's good. It's good for you to do that.
You know, to your point about paradigms, you know, and you're right on the money there, Larken. These are indoctrinated paradigms that people are fed. And then so when you come to them with a new truth, you're very right. They don't want to get out of that paradigm. Now, case in point 9/11, I'll talk to some very intelligent people about that. And it's usually because I feel the intelligent people are easiest to sway because they can add, 1 and 1 and 2 and 2. And, I've had some friends where I've walked down the path and I'd say, all right, did you know this? Wow, that's unsettling. Did you know this? Ooh, I didn't know that. That's unsettling. And you can walk them down that path so far. And I literally had a guy that just said, okay, stop. I'm like, what? He goes, just stop. And he didn't want to go any farther because just what you said, it just is too unsettling of that indoctrinated paradigm that they've been spoon-fed, since they've been watching the tube and listening to the U.S. media their entire life. It is quite a fight. And to me, that's who we're up against. You've got you on one side of the street, you've got somebody on the other side, and you're trying to shout to them information. But in the meantime, a big noisy bus is going through the two of you, and that big noisy bus is the mainstream media. And you have to constantly shout through that and try to get through this mechanism that indoctrinates these people all the time in their life. It is quite a battle.
Right. And the fact that the media pretends that it's like, oh, we're so diverse and we have all these different opinions and ideas that you can be exposed to. And, the range of ideas is microscopic, and they pretend that that's a choice. And so a lot of what I do in my little YouTube videos is just sort of take one piece of the mainstream paradigm and stick a needle in it, just to bother people, just to make people uncomfortable in their head by making them uncomfortable with their own assumptions, just by showing them something they already know. Like I don't even bother getting into many quote unquote conspiracy theories, even though, I know government does a heck of a lot of very slimy, evil stuff. But even just using what people know, it's pretty, like what everybody knows, it's pretty easy to start to mess with how people think and get them to start thinking. Like one of the most controversial things I wrote, and then it turned into a video. It was an article first, which made national news 3 times, was an article called "When Should You Shoot a Cop?" which, of course, the title completely freaked out tons of people. And the article starts by saying, I know this title is going to freak out tons of people. And then it gets into the fact that throughout history, lots and lots of really evil stuff has been done in the name of law enforcement. And so it just asks, okay, where do you draw the line at which you'll say, I don't care if you call it a law. If you do that, I'm going to resist you. And it was designed to make people freak out and get emotional. And I say, okay, are you telling me it's never okay to shoot at somebody with a badge? And some people will say, yeah, that's horrible. Okay, what if the guy with the badge has an SS badge and we're in the Warsaw Ghetto and he's trying to round up the Jews and they're shooting back? Well, that's different. Okay, well, the answer isn't never anymore. Now it's sometimes. But just the fact that people are so programmed to think, don't you ever disobey authority and never, ever even think about resisting, because that's been hammered into their head so long that if you even bring up the idea of actually resisting, and I don't even bother to say where I draw the line, and I just kind of raise the question, like, is there anything a guy with a badge could do to you that would make you resist? Or will you let them do absolutely anything they want? And almost everybody will then can think of a situation, okay, if they came to take my guns, I would resist. Or if they just decided to lock up everybody who voted for Ron Paul, I would resist. Just to get people to start thinking in a direction that, never in a million years will the mainstream media talk about, maybe in some cases you should resist what is called law and be a criminal.
Yeah,
You're not going to hear that on Meet the Press anytime soon. You will hear it from all of the founding fathers.
That's right. And because back then they had a backbone.
Right, they had a backbone, and then what they instantly did after saying all the stuff they did was have a revolution and shoot at people who were calling themselves law enforcement. Right. But the fact that people are trained, the fact that people are trained to not think outside this little box. So what I intentionally do is nudge them to an uncomfortable place just to try to get them to think.
That's awesome.
Make these little videos that aren't, they don't try to explain the whole world in 10 minutes. They just try to mess up somebody's assumption and make them back up and think, wait, what do I think about that?
No,
really.
You do, and you do some very powerful work. I want to get to John King real quick because he has a comment before we end the broadcast. So, John, go ahead. John King, yes, that mute button works very well, I must say. Or not. Okay, John King.
He fainted.
I'm here. I'll get the hang of it.
It's a new setup he's got there, folks. So
I'm messing with you, Joe. I'm messing with you.
It only takes 18 months for him to get used to it.
People think it can't happen here. They don't know history. America is run by the globalists, sworn to the UN. Past presidents, Obama, Clinton, Carter, Reagan, they were all members of the CFR. Your media members that you watch on that talking box are all members of the CFR. And the CFR's goal is to undermine U.S. sovereignty and conquer the U.S. Look, folks, these are globalists. They want a one-world currency, a one-world system, and the only way to do it is to get rid of the United States, who stands in their way. How are they going to do it? They're going to try to disarm the slaves. If you let them disarm you, you commit your children's children to slavery for life.
Amen to that, John. Very well said. Larken, any closing thoughts as we got about a minute left?
Well, a thing I often close with is that it's so easy to point at the control freaks and the psychos and the politicians and say they're evil and they're stupid and they're doing all these evil things, and they totally are. I'm not saying don't do that, but it's also good to always take a break and back up and make sure that you're not accidentally thinking things and doing things which help the bad guys. Because the most uncomfortable thing I learned through my process was that for much of my life, I was accidentally helping the control freaks and didn't even know it. And my book, The Most Dangerous Superstition, is designed to help people get outside of the mindset that accidentally enslaves them and helps the most evil people in the world, because almost everybody does it, and nobody wants to do it, and almost nobody notices that they are doing it.
It's really funny how easily we get mind screwed. You know what I mean? It's funny how the public really falls prey. Folks, you can visit Larken's website. That's larkenrose.com. And can they purchase your book right there, Larken, your books?
Yep, they're on larkenrose.com. That's LARKENROSE.com. They're also on Amazon. If you
very good. Very good. And his YouTube channel is Larken Rose. How convenient. So subscribe today. Go check out his videos. Read his books. Visit his website. Read his blog. As you can hear by just this hour. It was very good. Stay tuned, folks. Michael Murphy coming up on Down the Rabbit Hole. Why in the world are they spraying? He'll answer those questions coming up after the news. Thank you, Larken, for coming by. Thank you, guys. Have a great night, everybody.
Thanks for having me. Good night.